The notification flashed across my phone screen as I sat in a client meeting. Intrusion detected, multiple subjects. I discreetly switched to my home security app and watched in disbelief as 3 people methodically moved through my living room. I recognized them immediately. Lisa Anderson, our tyrannical HOA president, and her 2 loyal minions. My shock quickly gave way to a calm smile as I excused myself from the meeting and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Department of Homeland Security Special Response Unit, answered a stern voice. Identification? Authorization code Wilson Delta 792, I replied. We have an active breach. Are you wondering how your neighborhood HOA president ended up on Homeland Security's radar? Let me take you back to where it all began. I bought my dream home in Oakwood Estates 6 months ago after selling my cybersecurity startup. After 15 years working for the Department of Homeland Security as a senior network security specialist, I was ready for a quieter life. Or so I thought. Oakwood Estates seemed perfect. Immaculate lawns, stunning homes, and an atmosphere of exclusivity that came with the hefty HOA fees. What I didn't realize was that I'd just entered the domain of Lisa Anderson, possibly the most power-hungry HOA president in suburban America. I first met Lisa during my moving-in weekend. She appeared at my doorstep with a leather-bound copy of the community bylaws, a practiced smile, and cold eyes that assessed every detail of my appearance. "Welcome to Oakwood Estates, Mr. Wilson," she said, extending a manicured hand. "We're very particular about maintaining our community standards here. These bylaws outline everything you need to know." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the heavy binder. "I've already reviewed the digital copy my realtor provided." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps irritation that I'd preempted her. "Then you're aware that all exterior modifications require HOA approval," she said, gesturing toward the security cameras I'd been installing, "including surveillance equipment." Actually, Section 12.3 specifies that security systems fall under resident safety provisions requiring only notification, not approval, I replied. "I submitted the proper form yesterday via email." Lisa's smile tightened imperceptibly. "You've done your homework, Mr. Wilson. Not everyone takes such initiative." "Force of habit from my previous career," I offered casually. "And what was that?" "Cybersecurity risk assessment." I deliberately kept it vague. She nodded, though I could tell she was recalibrating her approach. "Well, I'm sure we'll see you at next Tuesday's community meeting. Attendance is expected." That interaction set the tone for what would become an escalating battle of wills. Within the first month, I received violation notices for my front door color, which was pre-approved by the architectural committee before Lisa intervened, the native plant garden I'd installed despite it being on the approved vegetation list, and the placement of my trash bins, which were behind a privacy screen as specified in the bylaw. Each notice came with increasingly punitive fines, and each time I responded with polite, meticulously documented rebuttals, citing the exact bylaw provisions that supported my position. I never raised my voice, never made accusations. I simply stood my ground with cold, hard facts. This approach only seemed to intensify Lisa's determination to put me in my place. At the monthly HOA meeting, I got my first glimpse of her inner circle. Robert Jenkins, the treasurer, a balding man with nervous eyes who flinched whenever Lisa spoke, and Karen Miller, the secretary, whose perpetual scowl conveyed her disdain for anyone who questioned their authority. The meeting was an education in subtle tyranny. Residents requested reasonable accommodations, a child's swing set, a small vegetable garden, a basketball hoop, only to be shut down with arbitrary interpretations of vague bylaw provisions. When one elderly resident, Sarah Thompson, questioned the sudden increase in administrative fees, Lisa cut her off. "The board's financial decisions are not up for debate, Mrs. Thompson. If you can't afford to live in Oakwood Estates, perhaps it's time to consider other options." The room fell uncomfortably silent. I made a mental note to introduce myself to Mrs. Thompson later. When my turn came to address the board, I raised questions about the transparency of HOA fund allocations. According to the annual financial report, nearly 30% of our dues are categorized as miscellaneous administrative expenses, I noted. That's approximately $87,000 annually. Could the board provide a more detailed breakdown of these expenses? Lisa's smile didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Wilson, financial minutiae are handled by the treasurer and reviewed by our accountant. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing. I'm simply requesting public information that should be available to all members as per state law governing HOAs, I persisted calmly. We are well aware of the laws, Mr. Wilson, she snapped, her composure slipping. The meeting agenda doesn't allow time for a line-by-line review of expenses. Next item, please. As the meeting adjourned, I noticed several residents giving me appreciative nods. One whispered, "About time," someone stood up to them as he passed. I also noticed Lisa, Robert, and Karen huddled in intense conversation, casting occasional glances in my direction. I didn't need to hear them to recognize the formation of a plan. I'd seen enough threat assessments in my career to recognize one taking shape. Outside, Mrs. Thompson approached me with a determined stride that belied her 70 years. "Young man," she said quietly, "be careful. The last homeowner who questioned the finances suddenly found himself with so many violations he was forced to sell. Lisa doesn't like being challenged." "Thank you for the warning, Mrs. Thompson," I replied. "I'm Mike Wilson, by the way. Sarah Thompson, 40 years in this neighborhood, long before Lisa and her cronies took over." She hesitated, then added, "They've been watching your house when you're gone. I've seen them taking photos of your property from the street." I nodded, unsurprised. "Would you mind sharing your contact information, Mrs. Thompson? I have a feeling we might need to compare notes." Later that evening, as I reviewed my home security footage, I confirmed Sarah's warning. Lisa's black Mercedes had driven past my house 3 times that week, slowing each time. In one clip, Karen was clearly visible in the passenger seat, pointing a camera at my front yard. It was time to upgrade my security system. As a former DHS cybersecurity specialist, I had maintained certain connections that most homeowners lacked. Within days, I had installed a comprehensive system that would make most government facilities envious. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, facial recognition, and a direct alert line to my former colleagues at Homeland Security's Residential Protection Program, a little-known division established to protect retired agents with sensitive knowledge. I also began my own quiet investigation into Oakwood Estate's HOA finances. What I discovered exceeded even my suspicious nature. Falsified maintenance contracts with companies owned by Robert's brother, inflated consulting fees paid to a business registered to Lisa's husband, and systematic persecution of anyone who questioned their authority. Most concerning were the stories that emerged as I spoke with other residents. The Davises had been forced to sell their home of 20 years after receiving daily violation notices. James Peterson was on the verge of losing his house to HOA liens after questioning maintenance expenses. The pattern was clear: challenge Lisa's authority, and you would be systematically driven out. What Lisa and her cronies didn't realize was that they had picked the wrong opponent. In my years at DHS, I'd tracked down terrorists hiding behind complex financial networks. A small-time HOA fraud was child's play by comparison. I began documenting everything, setting up a secure server to store the evidence, and reached out to former colleagues at various agencies. When I was ready, I set my trap, spreading the word that I would be out of town for a 3-day cybersecurity conference. In reality, I would be working from my home office, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. The morning after the HOA meeting, I woke to find 3 new violation notices slipped under my door. One cited improper landscaping, despite my garden having been designed by a landscaper who specialized in HOA-compliant installations. Another claimed my garage door was the wrong shade of beige. It wasn't. I had the paint code to prove it matched the approved color chart exactly. The third was truly absurd: improper mail receptacle maintenance. My mailbox was the standard Oakwood Estates model, installed by the developer. These petty harassments were designed to accomplish two things: drain my financial resources through accumulated fines, and provoke an emotional response they could use against me. I filed each notice in my growing documentation and responded with the same calm precision that I knew infuriated Lisa. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," I called out as I spotted my elderly neighbor checking her roses the next day. "Beautiful flowers." She glanced around nervously before approaching my property line. "They're watching you even more closely now," she whispered. "Lisa and Karen were parked down the street for nearly an hour yesterday, taking pictures." "I know," I replied, handing her a cup of coffee, my excuse for the conversation. "Would you be willing to tell me more about how the HOA operated before Lisa took over?" Sarah's face darkened. "This neighborhood used to be about community, not control. The previous board held barbecues, organized neighborhood watch programs, helped elderly residents with yard work. Then Lisa moved in 5 years ago, got herself elected president within 6 months, and everything changed." How did she manage to take control so quickly? Most people were too busy to attend meetings. She started with small changes that seemed reasonable: standardizing mailboxes, regulating holiday decorations. By the time people realized what was happening, she had changed the bylaws to consolidate power, installed her friends on the board, and started her reign of terror. And no one fought back? Sarah sipped her coffee. Tom and Linda Davis tried. Tom was an attorney. He challenged Lisa on legal grounds. Within weeks, they were drowning in violation notices. When Tom demanded a hearing, suddenly their property taxes were reassessed. Eventually, they couldn't afford to stay. Her voice dropped even lower. "And that's not all. I've overheard things. They have access to all the houses." "What do you mean, master keys?" "The security company that installed our standard locks gave copies to the HOA for emergency access. It's buried in paragraph 18 of the contract most people never read. But they use them for surprise inspections when people aren't home." This was more serious than I'd anticipated. Unauthorized entry was a criminal offense, regardless of any contractual clause. I thanked Sarah for the information and retreated to my home office to consider my next steps. That evening I made 2 calls. The first was to a former colleague at DHS who specialized in residential security protocols. "Mike Wilson, long time no hear. How's retirement treating you?" Jack Chen's voice boomed through my secure line. "Interesting, to say the least," I replied, explaining my situation. Jack listened carefully. "So you've got corrupt HOA officers potentially using master keys for unauthorized home entry. That's not just an HOA violation, that's breaking and entering." "Exactly. I need to upgrade my security, but in a way that won't trigger more violations. And I'd like to set up a bit of a monitoring system." Jack chuckled. "You want to catch them in the act. Given your status in the residential protection program, I can route your security system through our monitoring service. Any breach will be logged by our servers, creating a legally admissible chain of evidence." "Perfect. And what about those master keys?" "I'll send over our contractor. He'll install a secondary security system that looks standard but actually routes through our secure channels. If anyone tries to enter with those master keys, we'll know instantly." My second call was to FBI Special Agent Diane Rodriguez, who had worked with me on several cybersecurity cases involving financial fraud. "Wilson, you sure know how to spend your retirement," she remarked after I laid out the situation. "HOA fraud isn't usually in our wheelhouse, but if they're systematically targeting homeowners and engaging in ongoing financial impropriety, we might have a case for racketeering. Keep gathering evidence." Over the next 2 weeks, I meticulously built my case. I collected testimonies from former residents who had been driven out. I analyzed financial records identifying over $300,000 in suspicious transactions over the past 3 years. Most damning were the maintenance contracts awarded to companies with clear connections to board members, all at significantly inflated prices. During this time, the harassment intensified. My violations multiplied daily. Someone poisoned a section of my lawn, creating a large dead patch that promptly resulted in a landscaping violation. My trash cans were mysteriously moved to improper positions overnight, triggering more fines. Anonymous complaints were filed about suspicious activity at my house, resulting in police drive-bys. I documented everything while maintaining an outwardly cooperative demeanor. When I encountered Lisa at the local grocery store, I greeted her pleasantly, ignoring her barely concealed contempt. "Mr. Wilson," she acknowledged coldly, "I trust you've received our notices regarding your property violations?" "Yes, all 17 of them this week," I replied with a smile. "I've submitted my responses with supporting documentation. The board will review them, but I wouldn't be optimistic. We take community standards very seriously." "As do I, Ms. Anderson. Transparency, accountability, fairness, all critical standards for a functioning community." Her eyes narrowed at the implication. "Perhaps Oakwood Estates isn't the right fit for someone with your viewpoints." "On the contrary, I'm quite committed to my home. In fact, I've been researching HOA governance extensively. Did you know that in this state, HOA board members can be held personally liable for breaches of fiduciary duty? Fascinating legal area." I watched the color drain slightly from her face before she composed herself. "Is that a threat, Mr. Wilson?" "Not at all. Just a fellow community member sharing interesting information. Have a wonderful day, Miss Anderson." That exchange accelerated their timeline. The next day, Sarah Thompson called me in a panic. "I overheard them in the clubhouse," she whispered. "They're planning to enter your home while you're away at that conference next week. Lisa said they need to find something to shut you up for good." "Did they mention what they're looking for?" "Something about financial records. Lisa thinks you're building a case against them. Mike, be careful. They sounded desperate." "Thank you, Sarah. Don't worry. I've got a plan." That evening, I arranged for contractor vans to visit my home, ostensibly for security maintenance. In reality, they were installing additional hidden cameras throughout my house, focusing on my home office where I'd prepared a special collection of documents. Real evidence of HOA fraud mixed with a few fabricated personal financial records designed to look suspicious at first glance. I made sure rumors of my upcoming conference trip circulated through the neighborhood. I parked my car at the airport long-term lot and took a ride-share home to my darkened house, slipping in through the rear entrance that was concealed from street view. My trap was set. All I had to do was wait for Lisa to take the bait. 3 days later, I sat in my hidden home office, monitoring the camera feeds on a silent display. Right on schedule at 1:38 p.m., when most residents would be at work, a black Mercedes pulled up 2 houses down. Lisa, Robert, and Karen emerged, glancing furtively around the quiet street before approaching my front door. Karen produced a key from her purse, the infamous master key. I watched as she unlocked my door with practiced ease, proving this wasn't their first unauthorized entry. They slipped inside, and I switched to my interior cameras. "Remember, we need evidence that he's violating business use restrictions," Lisa instructed as they entered. "Tax documents, client files, anything showing he's running a business from home without approval." "What about the financial questions he's been asking?" Robert asked nervously. "If he's found something—" "He hasn't found anything because there's nothing to find," Lisa snapped. "All our transactions are properly documented." Karen snorted. "Right, properly documented in your husband's shell companies." "Shut up, Karen," Lisa hissed. "Let's focus. Robert, check the kitchen and living areas. Karen, take the bedrooms. I'll handle his office." I watched as they systematically invaded my privacy, rifling through drawers, checking closets, even looking under furniture. When Lisa entered my office, I held my breath. She immediately zeroed in on the filing cabinet I'd deliberately left slightly ajar. "Bingo," she whispered, pulling out the folders I'd prepared. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the documents. "Got you, Mr. Wilson." She pulled out her phone and began photographing the papers. Evidence of her own crimes that would later become evidence against her. The irony was delicious. As she continued searching, she found my locked desk drawer. After trying unsuccessfully to open it, she pulled a small tool from her purse and began picking the lock. Breaking and entering had just escalated to forced entry, another charge to add to the list. When the drawer opened, she found exactly what I wanted her to find, a folder labeled Oakwood Estates HOA Investigation. "I knew it!" she breathed, flipping it open. Inside were copies of bank statements, contracts, and a detailed spreadsheet tracking suspicious HOA expenditures. Her face contorted with anger as she realized the extent of my investigation. At that moment, Karen called from the bedroom. "Lisa, you need to see this." Lisa tucked the folder under her arm, theft to add to her growing list of crimes, and hurried to join Karen. I switched camera views to see Karen pointing at my closet wall, where I'd intentionally left visible a small safe with its door ajar. "Look at all this government-grade security equipment," Karen exclaimed, "and these credentials. Why would a retired cybersecurity consultant have active Department of Homeland Security clearance badges?" Lisa leaned closer, her expression changing from triumph to confusion. "What the hell is the Residential Protection Program? And why does he have a direct line to—" Her voice trailed off as she examined the documents I'd strategically left visible. I could almost see the wheels turning as she began to realize she might have underestimated her opponent. Robert appeared in the doorway, face pale. "Guys, we should go. Now. There's something not right about this. The security system looks way more advanced than normal home security." "Don't be ridiculous," Lisa dismissed him. "The system is disarmed. I made sure of it." What she didn't know was that while the primary system appeared disarmed, my secondary DHS-connected system was silently recording and transmitting everything. "Take pictures of everything," Lisa instructed. "We need all the ammunition we can get." As they continued their illegal search, I quietly sent a text message to Jack Chen. "Intruders confirmed, evidence being collected, ready for Phase 2. His response was immediate. "Teams on standby, give the word." I watched for another 15 minutes as the trio gathered what they thought was incriminating evidence against me. In reality, they were digging themselves deeper into a legal hole with every document they photographed, every drawer they forced open. Finally, Lisa seemed satisfied. "This is more than enough to get him evicted from Oakwood. Let's go." As they headed for the front door, I sent the second text. It was time to spring my trap. Lisa, Robert, and Karen were halfway to the front door when the security system suddenly came to life, lights flashing as an authoritative voice filled the house. "Security breach detected. Authorities have been notified. Please remain where you are." The three intruders froze, exchanging panicked glances. "It's a bluff," Lisa declared, though her voice trembled slightly. "The system was disarmed. Let's go." They rushed to the door, only to find it had automatically locked. Karen fumbled with her master key, but it no longer worked in the advanced lock I'd installed. "What the hell is going on?" Robert whispered, his face ashen. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. "We need to get out now," Lisa hissed, her composed facade crumbling. "Try the back door." As they rushed toward the rear of the house, I emerged from my hidden office, blocking their path. The look of shock on their faces was priceless. "Going somewhere?" I asked calmly. Lisa recovered first, straightening her jacket in a futile attempt to regain composure. "Mr. Wilson, we were just conducting a routine inspection as permitted by HOA bylaws." "With a master key you're not authorized to possess while I was supposedly out of town?" I smiled. "That's an interesting interpretation of routine inspection." "You have no proof of anything," Lisa shot back, though her eyes darted nervously to the security cameras now visibly active in the corners of the room. "Actually, I have extensive proof. Every moment of your illegal entry has been recorded and transmitted to secure servers. But we can discuss that with the authorities who are about to arrive." As if on cue, the wail of sirens stopped outside my house, followed by the sound of car doors slamming. "This is absurd," Lisa blustered. "We have every right to inspect properties for violations. Section 8.4 of the bylaws permits scheduled inspections with 48 hours written notice and homeowner consent," I recited. "Not breaking and entering with illegally obtained master keys." A pounding at the front door interrupted our standoff. "Department of Homeland Security, open the door immediately." The blood drained from Lisa's face. "Department of what? For an HOA dispute? This is ridiculous." I approached the security panel and unlocked the front door remotely. 4 agents in tactical gear entered, followed by 2 local police officers and a woman in a business suit, who I recognized as FBI Special Agent Rodriguez. "Mr. Wilson," nodded the lead DHS agent professionally. "Status report. 3 unauthorized individuals used fraudulently obtained master keys to enter my residence during my supposed absence," I stated formally. "They have conducted an illegal search, attempted to access secure government communications equipment, and removed confidential documents." "This is insane," Lisa protested. "We're the Oakwood Estates HOA board. We were conducting a routine inspection." Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, badge in hand. "I'm Special Agent Diane Rodriguez, FBI. Are you Lisa Anderson?" Lisa nodded mutely, her arrogance evaporating under official scrutiny. "We have a warrant to search your residence and HOA offices in connection with an ongoing investigation into wire fraud, racketeering, and extortion." Rodriguez's voice was professionally detached. "These officers will escort you home now." "This is all a misunderstanding," Robert interjected, sweat beading on his forehead. "We're just volunteers trying to maintain community standards." "By breaking into homes and stealing documents?" I asked mildly, pointing to the folder still clutched in Lisa's hand. A police officer gently but firmly removed the folder and placed it into an evidence bag. "Ma'am, I need to advise you of your rights. You're currently facing potential charges of breaking and entering, theft, invasion of privacy, and possibly conspiracy." As the reality of their situation dawned on them, the 3 HOA officers displayed remarkably different reactions. Robert seemed to fold in on himself, shoulders slumping in defeat. Karen looked frantically between her accomplices, as if hoping one of them had an escape plan. Lisa, however, turned her fury directly on me. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded. "No normal homeowner has Homeland Security on speed dial." The lead DHS agent answered before I could. "Mr. Wilson is a protected asset under the Residential Protection Program. His security is a matter of national interest." "Protected asset? What does that even mean?" Lisa's voice rose in confused anger. "He's a cybersecurity consultant." I decided it was time for the full revelation. "Former Deputy Director of Cybersecurity Operations for Critical Infrastructure at the Department of Homeland Security," I corrected. "Currently a security consultant to various government agencies dealing with sensitive information. My home security system is directly linked to DHS monitoring because of the classified material I occasionally handle." The stunned silence that followed was broken only by Karen's whispered, "Oh my God." Agent Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mrs. Anderson, Mr. Jenkins, Ms. Miller, we need you to come with us now. We have a lot to discuss regarding Oakwood Estates, HOA finances." As the police began to lead them away, Lisa made one last desperate attempt. "This is all about HOA violations. He's violating our community standards, the door color, the unauthorized security system, running a business from home." "Actually," I interrupted, retrieving a document from my desk, "I have written approval for all of those items, signed by the Architectural Committee before you intercepted and rescinded them." I handed the papers to Agent Rodriguez. "You'll find evidence on Mrs. Anderson's home computer showing she retroactively changed committee decisions on select homeowners who questioned her authority." Robert suddenly found his voice, panic evident in his tone. "Lisa, what is he talking about? You said all the rejections were properly voted on by the committee." The fracturing of their united front was immediate and satisfying. "Don't say another word," Lisa hissed at him. "Both of you, not a word until we have lawyers present." As they were escorted outside, neighbors had begun to gather, attracted by the unprecedented presence of law enforcement vehicles. Sarah Thompson stood on her front porch, a satisfied smile on her face as she watched Lisa Anderson being placed in a police car. Inside my home, Agent Rodriguez surveyed the scene with professional interest. "Your trap worked perfectly, Mike. We've been building a case against similar HOA fraud schemes across the state, but getting concrete evidence has been challenging. This is exactly what we needed." "Happy to help," I replied. "But there's more, much more." I led her to my office and unlocked my secure server. 3 years of financial records showing systematic embezzlement through fraudulent service contracts. Testimony from 17 former residents who were targeted and forced out, evidence of illegal entry into at least 12 other homes, and recordings of their meetings where they explicitly planned to use HOA authority to harass undesirable residents until they left. Agent Rodriguez whistled low. This is a prosecutor's dream case. How long have you been working on this? Since about a week after I moved in. Lisa Anderson made the mistake of assuming I was just another homeowner she could bully into submission. She never bothered to really investigate who she was dealing with. The DHS team had finished securing the scene and their leader approached us. Sir, we've confirmed no classified materials were compromised. Do you want us to maintain the security perimeter? That won't be necessary, Agent Taylor, but I appreciate the rapid response. After the agents departed, I stepped onto my front porch where a small crowd of neighbors had gathered. Their expressions ranged from confusion to outright jubilation. Sarah Thompson pushed her way to the front. Is it true? She asked loudly. Did they really break into your house? I nodded. Not only mine. We have evidence they've been entering homes throughout the neighborhood using unauthorized master keys. A murmur of outrage rippled through the crowd. But who are you? Asked a man I recognized from HOA meetings. Those were Homeland security agents. I offered the simplified explanation I'd prepared. I used to work in government cybersecurity. My home security system is still connected to federal monitoring due to the nature of my previous work. When unauthorized individuals entered my home, it triggered automatic federal response protocols. This wasn't entirely accurate, but it was close enough to the truth while avoiding classified details. Another neighbor stepped forward. What happens to the HOA now? Who's in charge? According to the bylaws, the remaining committee members will temporarily assume leadership until emergency elections can be held, I explained. In the meantime, I suggest we call an emergency community meeting tomorrow evening to discuss next steps. As the crowd dispersed, many neighbors approached to thank me or share their own stories of harassment by Lisa's regime. The community's mood was transforming before my eyes, from fear and isolation to cautious hope and solidarity. Later that evening, Agent Rodriguez called with an update. Thought you'd want to know, we executed search warrants on all 3 residences, plus the HOA office. The evidence is substantial. Lisa Anderson had detailed records of every homeowner she targeted, including surveillance photos and personal information she had no right to possess. Robert Jenkins is already cooperating, claiming he was just following orders. And the financial records? Even worse than we suspected. We've identified at least $480,000 in misappropriated funds over 5 years. Lisa's husband's law firm was billing for services never rendered. Robert's brother's maintenance company was charging triple market rates, and Karen was receiving kickbacks for approving certain contractors while rejecting others. What about the master keys? Found a complete set in Lisa's home safe, along with instructions on how to disable standard home security systems. Mike, these people weren't just corrupt HOA officers, they were running a sophisticated racketeering operation. I thanked her for the update and ended the call, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. The system I'd helped build during my government career, designed to protect against much larger threats, had been perfectly applied to this small-scale tyranny. As I settled in for the evening, my security system alerted me to someone approaching my front door. The camera showed Sarah Thompson, holding what appeared to be a homemade pie. I opened the door with a genuine smile. Mrs. Thompson, what a pleasant surprise. Apple pie, she said, handing it to me. My mother's recipe. I figured you deserved a proper thank you. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Is it true what they're saying? That Lisa was stealing HOA funds for years? The evidence certainly suggests extensive financial impropriety, I confirmed. Would you like to come in for coffee? I could use your insights on how this neighborhood functioned before Lisa took over. Sarah's eyes lit up. I'd like that very much. You know, before all this ugliness, Oakwood Estates was actually a wonderful community. As I welcomed her inside, I reflected on the day's events. Lisa Anderson had spent years cultivating power and fear, never imagining that her perfect target, a quiet new homeowner who seemed to have something to hide, would be the instrument of her downfall. She had broken into my house looking for secrets, never suspecting that I had spent my career protecting the nation's most sensitive information. She had attempted to use my privacy against me, not knowing that I had specialized in tracking people who did exactly what she was doing. Most importantly, she had forgotten the fundamental principle I had built my career upon. Security isn't just about locks and cameras. It's about understanding human behavior, anticipating actions, and being 3 steps ahead at all times. And in this case, it was about restoring a community to the people who actually cared about it. The community meeting the following evening was unlike any HOA gathering in Oakwood Estate's recent history. Instead of the sterile, tightly controlled sessions Lisa had conducted, the clubhouse was alive with conversation as neighbors who had barely spoken to each other in years shared their experiences. I arrived early to set up a simple presentation with the help of Agent Rodriguez, who had agreed to attend to answer questions about the legal proceedings. The remaining HOA committee members, 2 nervous-looking individuals who had always voted with Lisa but weren't implicated in the criminal activities, sat awkwardly at the front table. By 7 p.m., the room was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Many faces I'd never seen at previous meetings. Residents who had learned to stay invisible to avoid Lisa's targeting. I opened the meeting with a brief explanation of recent events, carefully sticking to confirmed facts without embellishment. As I spoke, I could see the community's collective realization that the reign of terror was truly over. In the interest of transparency, I concluded, I want to share what the FBI has authorized me to disclose about the financial investigation. Over the past 5 years, approximately $480,000 of our HOA dues were diverted to fraudulent vendors with direct connections to the former board members. The collective gasp was followed by angry murmurs. That's nearly $2,000 per household, someone calculated aloud. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward. We're in the process of freezing assets, and we'll be working to recover as much of these funds as possible for restitution to the HOA. A middle-aged man stood up. I lost my job last year and nearly lost my house when I couldn't keep up with both my mortgage and the special assessment for landscaping. Lisa told me rules were rules. Now I find out she was pocketing that money. Similar stories emerged as residents gained courage to speak up. The couple who couldn't get approval for a wheelchair ramp for their elderly mother. The single mom who was fined repeatedly for leaving her trash cans out too long on days she worked double shifts. Each account revealed the methodical cruelty of Lisa's regime. Sarah Thompson, sitting in the front row, finally raised her hand. When I acknowledged her, she stood with dignity despite her age. I've lived in Oakwood Estates for 40 years. This neighborhood was built on community, not intimidation. We need to reclaim that spirit. Her words hit home, shifting the meeting's energy from anger to determination. The discussion turned constructive as residents suggested reforms for HOA governance. Term limits for board members, transparent financial reporting, recorded meetings, and a grievance process with checks and balances. These are all excellent ideas, I noted. But first we need to establish new leadership. According to our bylaws, we need to hold emergency elections within 30 days. A voice called from the back, I nominate Mike Wilson for president. To my surprise, the suggestion was met with enthusiastic applause. I raised my hands to quiet the room. While I appreciate your confidence, I think Oakwood Estates would benefit from having a diverse board that truly represents our community. I'm willing to serve, but perhaps we should consider a slate of candidates who bring different perspectives and experiences. By the end of the meeting, we had nominated a promising group of candidates. Sarah Thompson, whose historical knowledge of the neighborhood was invaluable. James Peterson, the resident who had nearly lost his home to HOA liens. Maria Gonzalez, a retired accountant who volunteered to overhaul the financial systems, and myself. As people lingered afterward, exchanging contact information and forming impromptu committees, I felt the neighborhood transforming before my eyes. The walls of isolation Lisa had carefully constructed were crumbling. Oakwood Rodriguez approached as I packed up my presentation materials. "You've done good work here, Mike. Most of our HOA fraud cases don't end with the community coming together like this." "It's all them," I replied, watching the animated conversations around the room. "They just needed the chance." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The FBI investigation expanded as forensic accountants traced the complex web of financial misconduct. More charges were filed as evidence mounted: tax evasion, mail fraud, identity theft. Karen had been using residents' personal information for credit applications, and even blackmail. Most satisfying was the discovery in Lisa's home office of a detailed target list of residents she planned to force out, complete with strategies for each. My name was at the top with a note: "Too smart for his own good, find leverage." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Meanwhile, I worked with the interim HOA leadership to establish new procedures and begin the process of healing the community. We organized the neighborhood's first block party in 5 years, created a mutual aid network for elderly and disabled residents, and formed a transparent architectural review committee with clear guidelines. 3 weeks after the arrests, I received a call from Agent Rodriguez. "Thought you'd want to know. Robert Jenkins has agreed to testify against Lisa and Karen in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony is illuminating." "How so?" Turns out this wasn't their first operation. Lisa and her husband ran a similar scheme in their previous neighborhood before moving to Oakwood Estates. They've been doing this for over a decade, moving every few years to stay ahead of suspicion. Conservatively, we're looking at over $2 million stolen across multiple HOA. "That explains her efficiency," I noted. "She had the system down to a science." "Exactly. The prosecutor is pushing for maximum sentences, especially given the number of elderly victims who suffered financial hardship." The call ended with good news. The initial recovery of funds had begun, with approximately $220,000 already secured from frozen accounts. While not the full amount stolen, it would allow for the immediate reduction of HOA fees and the cancellation of the special assessment Lisa had planned for the following month. The day of the emergency election arrived, and the turnout was unprecedented. Nearly every household was represented as residents gathered to reclaim their community. The voting was conducted with complete transparency. Each ballot counted in public view. The results weren't surprising, but were nonetheless moving. Sarah Thompson, James Peterson, Maria Gonzalez, and I were elected with overwhelming support. As the new board, our first official act was to nullify all outstanding violation notices and fines issued under the previous administration and establish a review process for those who believed they had been unfairly targeted. Our second act was to commission a complete security audit of the neighborhood, with particular attention to the master key system. The results were shocking. Not only did Lisa and her accomplices have unauthorized access to our homes, but the security company that had installed the locks was owned by Lisa's brother-in-law, a clear conflict of interest never disclosed to residents. Within days, we had contracted a reputable company to replace every exterior lock in the neighborhood at HOA expense. The sense of relief among residents was palpable. Many had suspected unauthorized entries, but had dismissed their concerns as paranoia. The most amusing moment in the entire saga came during Lisa Anderson's arraignment hearing, which several Oakwood Estates residents attended to witness justice in action. As the judge read the extensive list of charges, Lisa maintained her imperious demeanor until a phone rang loudly in the courtroom. The bailiff confiscated the phone from her purse and inadvertently answered it on speaker. "Oakwood Estates Cosmetic Surgery Clinic calling to confirm Ms. Anderson's appointment for Botox and filing injections. Please be advised your account is currently flagged due to a payment dispute with your credit card company regarding charges labeled HOA Emergency Landscape Fund." The courtroom erupted in poorly suppressed laughter as Lisa's face flushed crimson. Even her attorney couldn't maintain his professional composure. The judge, unamused by the interruption but clearly connecting the dots, ordered the phone evidence preserved for the prosecution. Later that week, during our first official HOA board meeting, Sarah Thompson recounted the incident to appreciative chuckles from the attendees. So that's where our emergency landscape fund went, into Lisa's forehead. The laughter that filled the room wasn't just about the irony of the situation. It was the sound of a community reclaiming its voice after years of oppression. As summer turned to fall, Oakwood Estates transformed. Front doors appeared in previously forbidden colors. Gardens bloomed with non-standard but beautiful plants. Children's playsets emerged in backyards. None of these changes damaged property values. In fact, real estate agents reported increased interest in our neighborhood, citing the strong community spirit as a selling point. The legal proceedings continued in the background. Lisa and Karen both eventually accepted plea deals rather than face the overwhelming evidence at trial. Robert Jenkins, true to his character, cooperated fully in exchange for leniency, providing testimony that helped prosecutors identify and investigate other HOA fraud schemes across the state. By winter, the immediate crisis had passed, and we had established a new normal for Oakwood Estates, one based on mutual respect rather than fear. I found myself unexpectedly fulfilled by my role in rebuilding the community, applying the same problem-solving skills I'd used in national security to the smaller but no less important task of neighborhood governance. As I worked with my neighbors to draft a completely revised set of bylaws that would protect against future abuse while maintaining necessary standards, I reflected on how different things might have been if Lisa had simply checked my background before deciding I was an easy target. But then again, tyrants rarely believe they need to research their victims. That's what makes them vulnerable in the end. 1 year after the day Lisa Anderson and her accomplices broke into my home, Oakwood Estates held a community celebration in the park at the center of our neighborhood. Children played on the new playground equipment purchased with recovered funds. Seniors chatted on benches installed as part of our accessibility initiative. Families shared food from a diverse array of cultures represented in our community. I stood near the grill flipping burgers alongside James Peterson, who had become a close friend through our work on the HOA board. "Hard to believe this is the same neighborhood," he commented, gesturing to the animated groups of residents engaged in conversation. "A year ago, people would hurry from their cars to their houses without making eye contact. Fear is isolating," I replied. "Once you remove it, community is the natural state." Sarah Thompson approached, using her new walker, one of many assistive devices provided through our neighborhood support fund for residents who needed help with mobility but couldn't afford equipment. "The Johnson family just moved in on Maple Street," she reported cheerfully. "I've invited them to join us. They couldn't believe the HOA was throwing a party. Apparently they moved from a neighborhood with a dictator in charge." She chuckled. I assured them we'd had our own dictator but managed a successful coup. As if on cue, Maria Gonzalez arrived with our guests, a young couple with 2 small children looking slightly overwhelmed by the warm welcome. "Everyone, this is Dan and Emma Johnson," Maria announced. "They just moved in yesterday and I've already given them our welcome package and the actually readable version of our bylaws." Had been one of our first initiatives. Translating the dense legalese into plain language that all residents could understand, while maintaining the legally binding original version for reference. Dan Johnson shook my hand with a bemused expression. "I've never experienced anything like this. Our last HOA president would have fined us for bringing the wrong type of dessert to a potluck." "We've been there," I assured him. "In fact, there's quite a story behind our current setup." As the afternoon progressed, I found myself sharing that story with the Johnsons and several other new residents who hadn't experienced the Lisa era firsthand. With each telling, the narrative evolved from one of corruption and abuse to one of community triumph and renewal. "So what happened to them?" Emma Johnson asked. "The former board members?" "Lisa Anderson served 6 months in county jail and was ordered to pay substantial restitution," I explained. "She and her husband sold their house and moved out of state. Last I heard they were renting an apartment somewhere. No HOA. Poetic justice, Dan remarked. Karen Miller received probation and community service. She's actually still in the neighborhood, keeping a very low profile. She works at the city park collecting litter, part of her mandated service hours. And Robert the treasurer? Minimal jail time due to his cooperation. He's become something of a cautionary speaker at HOA management seminars, talking about the slippery slope from administrative overreach to criminal activity. As evening approached and the celebration continued under strings of lights we'd installed throughout the park, I took a moment alone to reflect on the lessons of the past year. The most important one was something I'd learned during my government career but seen proven in microcosm here. Systems are only as ethical as the people who run them. HOAs, like any governance structure, weren't inherently problematic. They could protect communities and maintain standards that benefited everyone. But without transparency, accountability, and genuine representation, any system could become a vehicle for tyranny. I also gained a deeper appreciation for the power of community resistance. Many residents had individually suspected something was wrong with Lisa's administration, but had felt powerless to challenge it. Once united, however, their collective knowledge and determination had been unstoppable. Perhaps most personally significant was my own transition from the world of national security to community leadership. I had spent my career protecting Americans from distant threats, but had found equal meaning in helping my neighbors protect themselves from the tyrant next door. My phone buzzed with a message from Agent Rodriguez. Thought you'd appreciate this update. Lisa Anderson's case has prompted state legislators to propose new HOA transparency laws. They're calling it the Oakwood Act. Your neighborhood might end up changing HOAs statewide. I smiled at the thought. What had begun as one corrupted neighborhood organization might lead to reformed governance for millions of homeowners. Sarah Thompson found me in my moment of reflection. Penny for your thoughts, Mr. President. Just appreciating how far we've come, I replied, and thinking about how sometimes the most important security threats aren't the ones that make headlines. She nodded sagely. You know what Lisa's biggest mistake was? Besides the obvious criminal activity, what's that? She forgot that neighborhoods are made of people, not properties. She was so focused on controlling the physical aspects, house colors, lawn heights, fence styles, that she never built actual relationships. That's profound, Sarah. Not really, she chuckled. It's just common sense, something she never had much of. Especially when she decided to break into the home of a former Homeland Security deputy director. To be fair, she didn't know that's who I was. Exactly my point. She never bothered to know anyone, not really. Sarah patted my arm. That's why you're a good president. You actually see the people, not just their violations. As the celebration wound down and families began heading home, stopping to chat with neighbors along the way rather than hurrying furtively as they once had, I helped the cleanup crew gather the last of the supplies. James Peterson joined me in folding tables. You know what I realized today? He asked. A year ago, I was about to lose my house because I couldn't afford Lisa's punitive fines. Today, I'm helping run the neighborhood I love, and my son just got a college scholarship from our new community foundation. The foundation had been established with a portion of the recovered funds dedicated to supporting education and hardship assistance for Oakwood residents. It's what neighbors should do for each other, I replied simply. Later that night, as I walked through my home, the same home Lisa had invaded a year earlier, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. In my government career, I had helped design systems to protect the nation from sophisticated external threats. I never expected to use those same skills to defend a suburban neighborhood from internal corruption. But perhaps the principles weren't so different after all. Security at any level was about protecting what mattered, whether national infrastructure or community trust. It required vigilance, preparation, and the courage to act when threats appeared. As I checked my much simplified security system before bed, I had deactivated the direct line to Homeland Security once the crisis passed. I smiled at the thought of Lisa Anderson's face when she realized whose house she had broken into. The moment illustrated a truth I had observed throughout my career. Those who abuse power rarely bothered to investigate the vulnerabilities in their own strategies, believing themselves untouchable. I turned out the lights and glanced out the window at the peaceful neighborhood, where porch lights created a welcoming glow, and the occasional dog walker strolled casually down the sidewalk without fear of citation. Oakwood Estates had transformed from a collection of isolated houses to a true community. Sometimes security isn't about building higher walls, it's about opening the right doors. Have you ever faced a power-hungry HOA or similar authority figure who abused their position? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. You never know who might benefit from your experience. And remember, knowledge of your rights is your strongest defense. Whether it's an HOA, a landlord, or any other authority, understanding the rules, sometimes better than they do, is often your best protection against those who would misuse their power. After all, the most satisfying victory isn't just winning the battle, it's changing the system that allowed the abuse in the first place.